Okay, welcome back to part two of our Pricing Like a Pro masterclass. Where we left off was we had talked about why it's important to get your prices right. And we talked about a lot of the pitfalls that you could run into during this process, or pitfalls that maybe you already have run into. Basically, things that could make it where your company has a hard time succeeding. Now, let's get into some pricing strategies. And there's going to be four different ones. So this lesson is going to cover what a cost plus pricing strategy looks like, which is also known as markup pricing. And it's basically where you figure out what all the cost is of the design that you're selling. You add some profit to it, and that's going to be your selling price. We're going to talk about a value-based strategy where basically the price almost has nothing to do with what you charge for the item, or I'm sorry, nothing to do with what it costs you to make the item, but it's what you feel like its value is to the market. And that's where your price is going to come from. There's a competitive pricing strategy. I've kind of hinted at that in the last section. It's one where a lot of people do it incorrectly, and a lot of people do it where you're just matching a competitor's pricing. But a true competitive pricing strategy has a lot to do with monitoring everybody else's prices and adjusting your prices based on what their prices are. And then there's an intuitive or gut pricing, and that is kind of like the value-based pricing, except for instead of what you're choosing to charge based on what you think its value is to your customers, you're choosing a price based on the value that you feel like it should have, regardless of what anybody else says. So all of these pricing strategies need to start in the same place. And that is going to be determining what something costs you to build. You have to know that information in order to get a really good price. The other thing that you'll notice is very seldom are we going to use just one of these strategies. A lot of times we're going to mix these strategies together, and we're going to come up with a price based on a combination of pricing strategies instead of just one of them. So in order to know your cost, one of the things that everybody should be able to have figured out is going to be this thing called overhead. Now, overhead can be this big, scary monster where there's so many parts that go into it, but I want to give you a few different ways of looking at it where it can be broken down and something you can figure out in a way that's pretty easy for you. In fact, we have given you a tool already that will make this easy for you, and it is our Balloon Guild balloon pricing sheet. Now, I'm going to kind of run through this with you a little bit so you can understand how to use it. And then we'll talk about what the numbers will mean and all of that good stuff. So if you've been in business longer than a year, then what I would recommend you doing is take your last year's information, and you should have totals. If you've already done your taxes, then you'll have totals based on the amount that you've spent for each of these departments. So if you're going to do an entire year's worth of information at one time, I'm going to let you know that is what I did. And what that looks like here is a big number that I just put in December. It doesn't really matter what month that number is in, but it's in December because that's just where I put it. So for me, for advertising, I had $4,664 spent in 2022. If you remember what I said in the first one, I'm basing my numbers off of 2022 because that's the tax year that I have completed, the most recent. I've added uniform cost. There were bank charges that I've had. There's all these different fees. You see, a big one for me is the leasing of a space. So I actually rent two spaces. That cost me $63,000 in 2022. We rented a storage unit for part of the time. There's employee meals. So here's the reality for this file. It almost doesn't matter where you put the information, so long as it gets in the file. Now, this file is amazing. John Fudge is the other owner of the Balloon Guild, and he is the one who created this file for us, and it's awesome. So these blue boxes, if you look, you will see that they have functions built into them. So when you're navigating this file, you're using it, don't do anything with the blue boxes. They will update themselves automatically. So like right now, that box says 0. If I put 1 in here now, it's going to say 1. If I put 1,000, 10,000 in here, it's going to change that number to 10,000, right? So don't worry about the blue boxes. They will figure up themselves. Now, we do have these kind of broken off into different sections. So if you're really good and really organized, then you can put your information in exactly where it needs to go. Now, let's say that in general administrative, you have a charge that doesn't really fit any one of these items. Maybe you're never going to use a storage unit. So you could click on storage unit and you could put sales team salary, if I can type sales team salary. You could change this to whatever you want it to be. This is your file, so you're able to personalize it. What I would recommend is make a copy of it so you always have the original, and then you can modify it however you need to fit your business. Again, what matters isn't really for the purpose of overhead. It's not really what the overhead is paying for so much as the amount of money you've spent in overhead. So in like this category, employees and payroll, when I pulled up my numbers, I had 3 different numbers that all represented different types of employee payroll. So I just put them on one of these each month. It doesn't really matter, right? So what's going to happen is you are going to see at the very bottom, it's going to come up with a total. That is the total amount of money that you spent on overhead items. The next thing you're going to do is figure out the amount of events that you have done for that same period of time. So for me in 2022, we had, let me make it where you can see this information. There we go. Okay, so in 2022, we spent $264,000 in overhead expenses. We did 708 events. And then you also want to put the amount of revenue that you brought in during that time. Okay, so these numbers are numbers you're going to have to enter in. You see they're in the orange, golden, orange color, yellow, whatever. The numbers that are going to automatically update are the numbers that we want that are really, really important. So out of 708 events, we spent $264,000. And what that averaged to for us is the average overhead cost per event was $373. That means any job that I do automatically will cost $373, plus the cost of the materials and everything else. So overhead is in addition to the cost of getting the job done. It's part of it, but it's not just the only part. So that number is really important to have. Now, if you look, our average ticket item for 2022 was $1,067. So if I took this number and I subtracted the cost of overhead from it, I'm still looking at about $700 per job. And then from that, what is getting paid from that $700 per job is the cost of getting the job done itself. So as in like the direct cost, the cost of balloons, the cost of ribbon, labor, all of that stuff would come out of that amount. And then what's left would be profit for the job. Now, another way of looking at overhead is determining a percentage of your revenue that is what overhead is paying for. So in 2022, you see our overhead percentage was almost 35%. So these numbers will come back into play later throughout these lessons. But I want you to see how you put in your information and it will update these numbers for you. This is a godsend because if you had to figure this stuff out yourself, It's a lot of math. It takes a lot of time. It's frustrating. But imagine if I had no idea that I was spending an average of $373 per event in overhead. And I get a job that's $1,000 job, 1,067. And I think this job cost me $200 to do, right? $200 in materials and labor and all that stuff. I could think to myself, I made $867 on this job. But the reality is, I really only made about $500 from that job because overhead was a factor. And the difference between $800 and $500 is pretty significant, right? So if I'm not careful with my numbers and I don't get them correct, or I just don't even do them, which is what a lot of us do, then we're basing our knowledge of how good our company is off of incorrect information. And that's going to be one of those pitfalls that's going to lead to a sinking ship. So one way of using this is if you have final information for a year, you can put it all in at once. Now, if you want to use this on the fly, what that's going to mean is it's going to mean that your overhead will be actually more accurate. Because right now we are in the month of April. This is for 2022, right? So honestly, 2023 would probably get me closer to accurate. And what would get me even closer than that is if I take all my expenses for the month of January and I put them in January's column instead of just one total at the end. I'm averaging them out per month. So then I'm going to take all my expenses for January. I'm going to put them in the columns. I'm going to make sure that the total number of events that I did in January are entered in here. And I'm going to make sure the amount of revenue for January is entered in here. And then whatever numbers that gives me are going to be pretty close to accurate. Now, what's important to note is that there are some items that are not a monthly expense. So an example here that I have is like this networking membership. We paid $884 for networking memberships. They were probably like NACE and ILEA meetings and just different organizations that we had to pay to be a part of. Now, those costs are annual. So if I want my overhead average to be accurate, even though I only pay it once a year, what I really need to do is break that cost out. In this case, it was $884, and I need to divide it by 12. That way I'm factoring these annual costs into our overhead as we go month to month, which will make the overhead numbers significantly more accurate. In this case, it brings the total to just under $74. And then when I run that out over 11 months, what that leaves is $70 for the last month. And the price and numbers are going to be the same. And they're going to be accurate. So that might sound like it's a little bit more confusing. The reality is all I'm doing in this case is I am making sure that the numbers that I enter in are accurate for the time that I'm trying to get this number from. So if it's April, I'm actually not going to put these numbers in this line item because it's not going to be real because I haven't paid for those months yet. So I would only do the first 4 months expenses. I would do the total amount of events we've done in those 4 months, and I would add the total revenue we've made in those 4 months. And then all of your numbers are centered around the same group of time. And that's going to help you get very accurate information. Now, this tool is pretty awesome. And there's more to it than just, there's a lot more to it than just this sheet. So I want to show you the other things that we have for you in this tool. We have a price guide, and I'm leaving in your tool, there's going to be this example. I want to leave it here for you so that you can see, you can basically see how to make this work. And this price guide will go kind of sort of on the cost plus that we're going to get into in a little bit. But what you're going to do is you're going to add all your items, and you're going to add the quantity of each one and the cost of that item per individual unit. And then it's going to give you your total cost for your direct cost. You're going to add your labor. That's going to give you your total direct cost for your labor. And then you're going to put in your overhead percentage. So if you remember, my overhead percentage was 35. So I'm going to change this to 35% so that it matches. And you can see over here on the left, it brings that number forward. And that's going to change a number here in the blue for you. And then you can put your profit margin, whatever you want it to be. We're going to say 40% profit margin. And then what's going to happen is it's going to give you a suggested selling price for the items that you have listed out here, right? Then you could type in what your actual selling price is for the item, and you will be good to go. Okay, that's a bit more realistic. I think that's where we would be on it. Okay, so you see, you can adjust some of the numbers, but the point is when you set these numbers, you're setting them for a reason, not because you want the numbers to look pretty, but you're setting them on purpose so that they make sense for your business. Now we have, in addition, there is also a manual. That's a second one that I'm going to get back to that as an example. We have a manual price tool where if you're a maniac who just loves math and numbers, you can put all that information in here and you can break out your calculator and do it yourself, because nothing on this sheet computes itself. You would be doing all the work, which is kind of the old school way of doing it. But we've created this tool, which is going to help you out a lot. So we'll come back to this tool in a little bit. I just wanted to show it to you guys, but I wanted to show you this overhead tool. And this is something that when we take our next break, take some time and put your numbers into this tool, because it's going to make a huge difference for how you are able to get proper numbers for your business. So overhead will include all of these items. You're going to have things like depreciation, your rent, your salaries that you're paying. Now, labor is built into the price of creating an item, but salaries are built into running your business. So if you pay somebody to manage your business, that's a salary that's going to end up in overhead. If you pay an office manager to answer the phones, that number is probably not factored into the job itself when you go and you start figuring up the totals. That's going to become overhead. If you pay any other kind of salaries that are not directly related to getting a single specific job done, those would go into overhead. Office supplies, maintenance and repairs, professional services, advertising, marketing, insurance, taxes. There's so many more things here. Now, the depreciation item, I want to kind of explain to you a little bit. And this is basically, if you know that you're going to have to buy a new inflator, when you buy that inflator, you're going to take that, the cost of the inflator, and you're going to imagine breaking that cost out over a set period of time. So let's just say you buy a new twin air inflator and it costs you $2,000. Let's just say you're going to say, I want to break the cost of this out over 5 years. Now, you're not going to, unless you put on a credit card, you're not going to be paying on it for 5 years. But what you are going to need to do is factor it as part of your overhead for 5 years. So you would take $2,000 divided by 60 months, which is 12 months times 5. And that would mean $33 would be factored into your monthly overhead expenses for that item. That's how I would think of those kind of items, the big purchases. Break them out over time. All right. So hopefully that helps you guys with overhead. Now, there is one more easy way of figuring out overhead, and you can do it on the percentage, You can do it on the dollars per job. And then the other way you can figure out overhead is if you take all of your expenses that are not related to paying for labor and you put them all on one business card or one bank account or one credit card or whatever, but one place. Then what you can do is every month you add up the total amount that you've spent and you just put that number in the file pretty much wherever you want. It doesn't matter what line item it's in. These specific breakouts of the categories are really for those who want to be super, super organized. But if you're just trying to get a very quick number of what your overhead actually is, and you don't care about the organization part, then just put that number in here. So if you spent $2,000 last month or the month of March, just hit 2,000 into this. And then you need to go down here and you need to put how many jobs you've done for that time frame, the total revenue you've made in that time frame, and then these other numbers will update themselves. All right. So let's move on from overhead and we'll start talking about these strategies. The first strategy is going to be cost plus. Oh, I take that back. I forgot that I had reorganized this a little bit. So we're going to do a little bit of number crunching and we're going to do it based on some of the numbers that I had just shown you guys. I want to show you some of the things that are going to modify your overhead, right? So if you look in the middle, 2022, we averaged 59 jobs a month. Our total overhead was $22,000 a month, which brought it to $373 per job. Our average ticket item was $1,067, and our overhead percentage per job was 35%. Now, if you guys remember anything about 2022 to 2023 to 2024, inflation was a really big deal. So you can imagine that the numbers that I'm going to show you for 2023, in all reality, were probably higher because the cost of everything has gone up. But since I don't have those numbers, I just kept them the same, the amount of money spent per month on overhead. What I will tell you that I do have these numbers is that we did less jobs in 2023. So our average jobs per month was only 44 jobs per month. Now, if you look at what that simple change did to our overhead, it brought our overhead per job to $500 a job instead of $373. If you look, our average invoice was $200 more per job. So as far as the amount of money left over after overhead, we actually have more money left over if those overhead numbers are correct. Again, I'm wagering that our overhead totals was actually a little bit higher than that. I just don't have all those numbers yet. But the amount of jobs that you do is a really big, easy thing for you to do to bring your overhead costs down. So you're not reducing the total amount that you're spending. What you're doing is you're spending that same amount over more work, which means the amount of money you make per job is going to increase. So this is what's cool is if you add more jobs, then you're going to actually make more money per individual job, and you're going to make more money overall because you're just getting more jobs. But what it does is it takes the overhead expenses and spreads them out thinner and thinner and thinner. So that's the name of the game. Keep your overhead costs low, get a lot of work that spreads it out so that your jobs are bearing the burden of overhead as easy as possible. We've already talked about the credit card option. And I want to show you guys some other examples on just a little difference and something that's going to make it where you can understand that overhead exists, whether you realize it or not. And example one is a decorator who works from home, and you don't pay yourself as a manager, and you don't really do your overhead proper. So you might factor a few items, like you're saving for a piece of equipment, you're saving $50 a month. You might factor your auto maintenance is $100 a month, your general liability insurance, your Balloon Guild subscription. You might save some money aside, and you know that that's an expense you're going to incur. So that total comes out to $300 a month. And I just factored 8 jobs per month for these examples because as a stay-at-home decorator, 8 jobs a month is pretty, that's average 2 a week. It's not too shabby. It's a good starting point. And hopefully you guys will be able to grow from there. But if all you think is that you're spending $300 a month on overhead, then that would mean your total overhead assumed is $38 per job. Now, if that's what you think, is that you're $38 a job, and someone hires you to build a single balloon column, and you think to yourself, okay, I can charge whatever for that balloon column because it's a bag of balloons, it's a little bit of time. Like, I'm only going to be spending $10, $15 to create that balloon column. And now I'm going to add this overhead cost because I'm not really doing it properly. So you're looking at $40-ish plus 15. You're only looking at $55. So you might think, I could just charge $90 for this column and I have a lot of profit in that job. And you would be wrong. To be honest with you, you'd be really wrong. And you're going to be wrong for the reasons that I'm about to share with you. Example number 2 has the same person who works from home. They have 8 jobs a month still. I want you to imagine that they are paying themselves as a manager and that they're doing their overhead significantly better. So if you're paying yourself $200 a week as a manager, that's going to be paying yourself $800 in a month. And you can see in this example, all of the information that's underlined is what has been changed from example 1 to example 2. So in this example, we are actually paying yourself back some of the rent. Now, if you work from home, just because you're not working out of the house doesn't mean you don't have a workspace. You're using part of your house as a job-based activity. And what that means is you should be getting some kind of a write-off for doing that. So what you want to do is you want to determine what percentage of your home is being used for business. And then you're going to take the percentage of your rent, of your mortgage payment, whatever, you're going to times it by that same percentage, and then you're going to get what should be paid to rent. And you're paying rent to yourself because you're renting your own house. Utilities, it goes the same way, right? When you start paying yourself this way, it's going to, one, give you a bit more of a realistic understanding at where your money's going. And two, it's going to force you to set your prices to a level that can absorb these costs because it's really important. And then three, when it comes time to move out of your house because you're getting more and more jobs and your home is not going to be able to sustain all the work you're getting, you're already used to paying these fees from the money that you're making through your business. So you're used to paying yourself an $800 salary. So let's say that you decide, I want to pay somebody else to do the management part of this, or somebody else to do the office work. You know that with the prices you have already established, you'll be able to pay that other person $200 a week if that's what you would choose to do. Now, when you add these numbers up, for example, number 2, that total comes out to $1,450 a month, which averages $181 a job. You see that's a very big difference between example 1 and example 2. Yeah, that's about $143 difference per job. So the person in example 2 is operating much closer to what an actual business should operate as compared to person number 1. if person number one wanted to sell me their company, I would have to take a look at their numbers, and realistically, they probably wouldn't have something that I would want to buy because their prices don't factor in the reality of their expenses, which means their prices are probably going to be too low. Example number two would give me something to work with where their prices are able to handle these costs. Then that tells me that they're thinking in a business way, and it's something that interests me to find out, is there real profit being made by the person in example number two? Now, example number three has one single difference, and that difference is they have acquired 4 more jobs a month. If they've acquired 4 more jobs a month and they have the same exact overhead as example number two, you will see that the total per job is $120 of overhead. Now, remember when I said that getting more work will reduces your expenses per job, which gives you more room for profit per job. So example number two and example number three, they do the exact same jobs, but example number three does 4 more of them. Example number three is going to make $61 per job more than example number two. So for those same 8 jobs that they both work the same, example number three is going to make $480 more because it's $60 per job times 8 jobs. And then they'll obviously have 4 more jobs on top of that. So you can see how getting more work spreads the overhead out, which means your expenses per job are going to go down because they're bearing the load a bit better. Okay, I know that was a lot, but we're going to get into these pricing strategies, which is the meat and potatoes of this this entire presentation. And then we will start crunching some numbers after that. But we're going to get into this. The first one is the cost plus pricing strategy. This is one where you calculate the total cost of your design. And that would be your direct cost, which are the materials and the overhead. You put those together, that's the total cost. Then you're going to add your desired profit margin onto that equation, and that's going to help you set your selling price. So here's an easy example. A balloon business calculates the total cost of creating a balloon arch for an Easter event to be $285. This cost includes the cost of materials like balloons and all the foils and all the 260s and all of that stuff. If the business aims for a 40% profit margin on each project, it would add 40% of the total cost to cover the profit. So essentially what this looks like is your total cost is $356. You can figure out what 40% of that is, which it's 142, or you can times 356 times 1.4, which will give you 140% of the total cost. That will give you your total cost plus your desired profit margin, and that will bring you to $498. So the selling price for the balloon arch using the cost plus strategy would be $498. Now, you might think, well, that feels a little bit too low. This is like a very unique design. I think it should be more. If you start thinking that way, one, you can only think that way once you've determined once you've used this strategy, then you can start determining, okay, well, actually, I feel like it's worth more. That gets you into a different kind of a pricing strategy, which we'll get to in just a second. So the advantages of a cost plus strategy is that it's simple, it's easy to understand, it's super math related. Like you put the numbers in, you get a straightforward answer. It also allows you to have your cost being recovered because they're included in the pricing strategy. So you know that your cost and expenses are going to be recovered. And then it's very consistent across the board. If you use this strategy, it's easy to have the same process for everything that you use this on. The limitations is that it doesn't consider market demand. So kind of like what I mentioned before about creating an amazing ceiling canopy during COVID. Cost plus would say I should charge X amount of dollars for this, but the market demand would be zero. So that would be too much charge for that. And even if you charge zero, they still wouldn't want it in that specific example. But cost plus pricing does not take into account competitive pricing, market demand, or any of that stuff. So it can mean your prices could be a little bit off. Now, it also means you could underestimate the value of the item and you could leave money on the table that you should be charging more for some of your items because of it. And then the final limitation is that it is easy to make a mistake. All it requires to make a mistake is for you to just forget about certain expenses or for you to overlook information. And then that's going to put your profit margin at jeopardy. Now, before we get into the second category of pricing, I want to ask you guys a question. How can somebody determine the value of anything? And as you guys are typing that out, if you're on this live, type it out in the chat. If you're watching this, there's no chat for you to type this on, but I want to tell you a story. And it's a story about a father on his deathbed and his son. And before he died, the father said to his son, "Here's a watch that your grandfather gave me. It's almost 200 years old. Before I give it to you, I want you to take this watch to the jewelry store and ask them what they would buy it for you, what they would offer you for it." So the son took the watch, went to the jewelry store, and then he came back and said, "They offered me $100 because it's so old." And his father said, "Okay, now I want you to go to the pawn shop and ask that same question. How much would they give you for the watch?" The son came back from this trip and he's like, "They said they would only give me $20 because it's scratched and it's so old." And then his father said, "Now take this watch to the museum and show it to them." And the son is, wants to honor his father's last wish. So he takes the watch to the museum, shows it to the curator, and he comes back wide-eyed. "Dad, they offered me $375,000 because this is a one-of-a-kind piece that will finish their collection." And the father tells the son, "I wanted to show you that the right place will value you in the right way. Don't find yourself in the wrong place and get angry because you're not valued. Never stay anywhere where someone doesn't see your value and you don't feel appreciated. If you don't know your value, you're going to settle for less than what you're worth." And that's true for relationships, and it's true for your profession, and it's true for your friendships. So when you know your value, you're going to get around people who value you in that same way. So this is a difference between most people and a few people. We've all been through stuff in life. We all are beat up. We all have some level of feeling like we're not worth what other people see sometimes, where we don't always have a good value of self-worth. However, the stronger you can develop that sense for yourself and for your business, the more you will not settle for lesser valued opportunities. You're going to continue to push for higher valued clients and higher valued places that you can live in life, which will be better all the way around. So the question is, how can one determine the value of something? And the answer is by how much somebody is willing to pay for it. If I set a value for an item and people pay that amount, then to them it's worth that amount, if not more. If I set a value for something and nobody pays that for it, then it's not worth that much to them. So when it comes to the value-based pricing strategy, you have to understand what perceived value is, and it is subjective, but you need to be able to have factors in mind that are going to guide you on this price determination. These factors are going to be, are you able to provide a quality that is above and beyond what they're going to get somewhere else? Is your services unique? Do you have brand reputation, high customer service? Are you easy to work with? Do you have great problem-solving abilities? What makes you more valuable than somebody else so that you can charge more than that other person. Or so you can raise your own prices. The more experienced you get in this industry, your prices should be getting raised to reflect that information. When you first start out, you shouldn't really think you're like on the same level as somebody who's been doing balloons for 20 years. So in all reality, your prices, unless they don't have their pricing correct, your prices shouldn't actually be what theirs are, because what you're offering to your customers is not the same. Until you get better, you grow your business, you grow your brand, you grow the relationships, then you can start really pushing value. Now, value-based pricing requires you to understand what your customers want so that you can provide that level of service to them. So you're able to see what their needs and desires are. You can see their pain points and how to help them alleviate that pain when working with your company. And then it also allows you to determine what's going to drive the value of your offerings and what the customer is willing to pay for it. So that value add could be that you're able to get jobs done quicker than somebody else, that the items you're offering have unique benefits that others don't. The emotional satisfaction of working with somebody will make a huge difference as well. So setting your price based on the value perception. In this picture is a great example. There is a lot of different options, or there's a lot going on here. It's not just a balloon wall, but you have like a neon LED sign, you have neon rope lights all through it. Just adding those alone creates a different level of value than the individual parts would do on their own. So I could charge significantly more for that wall because it has lighting and all of that stuff than I could for just the wall and then pay for the lighting separate. Like putting it all together creates a value to my customers. And our ability to communicate that value to the customers is going to be what's really important in order for us to be able to charge pricing based on a value-based strategy. Now, the other thing that will help you set your prices when it comes to the value-based strategy is something that we call the replacement cost. So if a centerpiece is a good example, you've been offered to get a quote for centerpieces, and you're quoting, let's just say $60 a centerpiece. And then you find out later the client didn't really go with your centerpieces. They went with some kind of floral arrangement. So then for you to start learning about the value of what you were offering, you really need to ask yourself, if they paid $60 for this floral arrangement, then was I not offering enough for the $60 where they thought these flowers would be better? Or is there a different reason why they went with the flowers? There are a lot of examples, but basically what you can ask yourself is, you're never going to be able to charge twice as much for what you want to give them when they could replace it with something that they feel is on the same level for half the price of what you're trying to charge. All that said, you shouldn't charge half the price for your decorations when the client's willing to pay twice as much for something that's on the same level as what you're thinking about offering at that reduced price. So learn what other options there are in our industry that could replace you and figure out how much those items cost, and then start working your pricing a little bit in that capacity. All of that is information that should just be going into your mind that's going to help you to do a better job with pricing. And then the last thing on the value-based pricing strategy is that if this is a way that you're going to go on pricing your items, you're going to start working on making sure that your customers' specific type of customers' needs are met, and that they're willing to pay for those needs to be met based on the pricing that you're giving. So again, it's kind of like the difference between your everyday birthday party versus a corporate event. Different needs, different values are being attributed to the items that you're selling, And that's kind of important. And I'm going to show you why this is important. Everybody, if you're going to do corporate events or you're going to work in hotels in your area, find out what that hotel charges for their items. In this case, the Omni Hotel, this is part of their catering menu that they give to anybody who's renting out their spaces. And I want you guys to see a couple of items on here that is crazy to me. The first one is at the very top, a 26% service charge is going to be applied to all food items, which means every single one of their prices is basically going to be 26% higher, which is bananas that this is what they're dealing with. The second thing I want you to see is that a cold brew coffee for 1 single gallon cost $130. Now, when we talk about your replacement value, I want you to think about this. If I am working with a client who is used to seeing these numbers, they're seeing a gallon of coffee cost me $130. And not only that, but it's going to be 26% higher. That's what they're used to seeing. And then you come along and you're offering them an amazing balloon column for $60. What are they supposed to think about that? I want you to ask yourself that question. Are they going to be like, oh, great, that's so exciting. Like, I can't believe we're saving money. When you hear about something that sounds too good to be true, especially in this culture, generally that's because it's too good to be true. And that means you're getting scammed, or the person who's offering you that item doesn't know what they're doing. And as a result, you as a company don't seem like you're up to par with what that client wants. So there are clients that will not be satisfied with you having reduced prices. I know it sounds crazy, but if you want to be a professional company that is working with higher end clients, corporate clients, get used to having to have higher prices. It's not a bad thing to me. I'm excited about it, but I'm just saying you need to get used to making sure that the items that you're offering are going to stack up appropriately to the other items that these companies are used to paying for right now. And think about the value of what we're offering. If you're offering an amazing entrance arch, let's say that you charge $600 for that entrance arch. People will talk about that entrance arch. People might get pictures with that entrance arch, whatever. Or that client could think, or it could have a few gallons of coffee and then people could have coffee instead. I've never been to an event at any of these hotels where people were walking away from the event talking about how amazing the coffee was, right? But they will have pictures on their phones of the decorations that we're bringing to the table. So keep that in mind, right? I know this is a very specific example towards my company and the area that I'm in, but do a little bit of research, find out what the market conditions are in your area, and then realize you may have to change your prices just so that you can get more work. You might have to raise your prices in order to get certain clients that you wouldn't get otherwise. Okay, so here's an example, and I wanted to show you how the cost plus pricing would stack up versus the value pricing. Let's say that you're a balloon decor business and you specialize in creating illuminated backdrops. You have unique designs, premium quality materials, meticulous attention to detail, and you can personalize your service and your offerings to your clients based on what their needs. So if you cost plus this design out, the total cost that it would cost you to make it, and that includes overhead, would be $612.50. Now, if you desire to have the plus part of this, which is a 40% profit margin, that would be an additional $245, which would bring your selling price for the cost plus to $857.50. Now, what I will tell you is that I would be willing to make a normal Link-A-Loon wall for $860 in this space. But the cost of that would be significantly less because all these foil balloons cost a lot of money when you start adding them all together. You're talking about dollars per balloon instead of pennies per balloon. So I would personally feel like this design is twice as good as a normal Link-A-Loon wall that I would be willing to charge this price for. This thing lights up. It's amazing. It's themed for the event of Valentine's Day. It is like this design in my mind looks like a motorcycle with ground effects lighting. It's like metal and light, and the picture honestly doesn't do it justice. This is an amazing backdrop, and I would be more than happy to charge like $1,900 for this. Now, here's what's cool about, and if you remember, I talked about we oftentimes will combine pricing strategies to get a price for a decor item. I would want $1,900 in order to make this design, but I know if I did the cost plus strategy, I know that anything over $860 is gravy. Now, I want a lot of gravy for this because I feel like it's worth it. But what if my customer came back and said, oh, we only have $1,600 in our budget? You're giving them, like if you gave them $300 discount, let me see what that percentage is. That's a decent percentage that you would be giving them. So 300 divided by 1,900, that would be like a 16% discount. However, you already know because you figured out the cost plus pricing that you're still going to make like your 40% profit and a whole lot more, even if you said yes to a reduced price. So this is an example where the value price would win out all day, every day, and the cost plus price would give me a minimum viable number that I would work with. And to be honest with you, because of the value, I wouldn't come anywhere near the $860 for this item because it's worth so much more. Okay, advantages for the value-based pricing strategy. One, it maximizes profitability. We just talked about that. Like you're going to get a lot more profit because you're already going above and beyond your cost plus pricing. It's going to reflect the customer's preferences because you're giving them value that they want, and it's going to lead to a higher satisfaction and customer loyalty. And then also, value-based pricing really cannot be used on everything. But what it can be used on are items that are different from your normal offerings. They're different from what your competitors are offering. Value-based pricing leads itself to differentiation, where you want different items. You don't want to be just like everybody else. It's limited in the fact that it's very subjective. So the value that you might attribute to something maybe doesn't work for your customer, and then you're not selling it. You could underestimate the value yourself. So you might say, well, I really think I wouldn't do that for less than $1,200. And your customer's like, okay, well, I'm getting a deal because honestly, I would have paid $1,900 for that item. Then you're leaving money on the table. And unless you're doing a crazy amount of market research, it's going to be hard for you to know. And then the last one is it requires market acceptance. So like I said, if you feel like you're valued, let's go back to the watch story. That kid could go into a pawn shop and said, did you know this watch is worth $375,000? They would look at it and say, not to me. It's worth $20, right? So you have to make sure that the items that you're replacing this value to are in the right place in order to get those sales. Now, this strategy, the competitive pricing strategy, is one that we don't really recommend because a lot of people do it wrong and because it's just not really the best strategy. I hesitated to put it in here, but I did put it in this course because I want you guys to understand that a lot of people do this. You may have done this at a certain point in your business career. Maybe you're doing it now And I just want to chat with you about it. So it is a strategy that people use, and it's one I want to just talk about. So in order to have a competitive pricing strategy, you have to understand market dynamics. You need to know like what your customers are charging, how often they're getting sales for the items that they're charging those amounts for, what their pricing strategies is, what customers prefer. You have to get a lot of the market trends and data and feedback. Businesses that use this strategy they can use it as a benchmark to determine their own. So you might say, well, Party City is now charging $5 for an 11-inch balloon to be filled with helium. I'm only charging $2. That doesn't make sense to me because I offer more than Party City, so my price should not be less than theirs at all, ever. Right? So you're doing a little bit of research to find out this information, and you're going to adjust your prices accordingly. And then some people use competitive pricing to feel like they're either matching a competitor's price or they're leading versus the competitors. And usually what they're leading is the downward spiral to where nobody's making any money. So you could either match your competitors' prices, tried and true, or you're going to decide that you're going to make your prices slightly higher or slightly lower than your competitors for intentional reason. Now, the thing that it requires is a continual monitoring of your competitors' pricing. You need to know what they're doing and stay informed. When they're running a sale, maybe you're going to have to run a different sale, something like that. It also would push you to have differentiated services and products so that you might be matching their prices in a lot of areas, but in order for you to get the sale, what are you doing different that's going to make someone buy your product as opposed to theirs when you're charging the same price, right? And then it often will lead itself to price wars. And again, this is a downward spiral where your competitor drops their price below yours, and then you drop yours below theirs, and just keeps going down, and it's going to erode profit margin in that capacity. Now, you could be the person who is the lowest price person in town, and you could potentially get a lot of work. What I'm going to tell you is that the kind of work you're going to get when somebody is only paying the least amount that they can, first of all, they're not the best clients to work with, and they generally want to nickel and dime you for everything that you've done because this $200 is extremely valuable to them, and they want to know every little thing they're going to get for it. Or you could have a client that's like, yeah, I have a $1,200 budget. You do great work. I trust you. Just make it look pretty. Which of those clients would you rather have? You're hardly ever going to have the $200 client giving you that conversation. They're generally going to want to know every little thing that they're getting because they're very mindful of what all those dollars are spending are getting for their dollars. So that's the thing about this strategy. It's not one that I would recommend, and it can make life a little bit tough when all you're doing is having to drop your prices all the time. So let's say that a balloon decor business operates in a market with several competitors and you offer similar decorating services to her events and parties. To remain competitive, you're going to have to regularly monitor your competitors' prices, their promotions, their different kind of events, and you're going to have to either match or have yours slightly different in some way, shape, or form to be competitive. If your competitor lowers their prices, so do you. Right? Like I said, it's just a downward spiral where nobody makes any money in the end. And then the last thing I'm going to say about this strategy, the customers that you have earned because of this strategy are on par with the guy who sees a girl that he's attracted to. She happens to have a boyfriend. He convinces her to cheat on her boyfriend with this guy. And then she breaks up with that boyfriend, and now she's this guy's boyfriend. Why would this guy ever think she's not going to do the same exact thing to him? That's what kind of person she is, right? So the kind of person who's coming to you because you're the lowest price, what happens if you're not the lowest price anymore? What happens if you're the person who you're like, oh, I'm at my bottom, I can't go any lower, and then somebody else does? When that happens, you're going to lose that customer. So this is not a strategy that I condone. It doesn't take into account what your competitors are doing in order to charge those prices. We're going to look at some pros and cons, and you'll see that most of them aren't even advantages. To be relevant in a market with competitive pricing by aligning your prices with those of your competitors. You don't know why your competitors are charging what they charge. And again, did you get into business to let somebody else tell you what to do and what to charge? The answer is probably no. So I don't see that as an advantage. Customer attraction, we just talked about. You're going to attract price sensitive customers, but you're going to lose them for the same reason. And then it's flexibility on pricing. You can change your prices as quickly as your competitors do to adapt, but why would you want to do that? So even though all three of those show them as an advantage, I don't see them that way because they all sound bad to me. The one thing I would say about competitive pricing is I would almost change the word competitive to comparative. And that would be, you have friends in your area that do balloons. I don't treat them as competitors. There are other people who do what I do. They're buddies, they're friends, they're whatever. And I might realize, hey, I see you're putting out a lot of these columns. I make the same kind. Like, what are you getting for those? And if your friend tells you a price that's in the same ballpark as you, oh, great. Then my prices were about the same. That's pretty good. But if they're not and they're vastly different, then you need to don't just match their price, but then you need to start asking yourself, why are they getting a different price than I am? And why are they getting the sales for that price when maybe I'm struggling? And you need to determine what your new prices should be because you're gaining information in your market, right? This is where you're just getting more information. It's not because they're competitors that you're going to match their prices. It's not because you want to get under their price. It's because you now have more information than you did before. Okay, the limitations is your profit margin is going to suffer big time because you're continuing to drop your prices and you're probably not reducing your expenses. Commoditization means that if you're relying solely on their pricing, you're just going to be ripping off the same designs everybody else is making in your area, which makes your designs interchangeable. And then it's literally price alone is going to be the only different factor for the customers who are coming your way. And then it limits opportunities for businesses to differentiate themselves based on unique features, qualities, or value-added services. Basically, because of price wars and margin erosion, you can only do so much. Whenever you are reducing your income, you're limited on what you can do extra to add value to your products and services. All right, and our last pricing strategy we're going to go over is called the intuitive pricing strategy. We also will call it like the gut strategy. And this one is one where you make decisions based on what you feel something is worth. So since this is sometimes referred to as your gut instincts, like I said, it's like the value strategy, only instead of you making an assumption at the value that this item has to your customers, it's kind of the value that you are attributing to whatever decor item that you are trying to sell. It's definitely a very subjective pricing strategy because you're the one making it up, and it's based on your perception of what you think they're going to pay, but not necessarily worrying about what they think it's worth. And you don't really spend a lot of time studying data or anything else on this one. And the more experience you have, the more often that you may run into using this strategy, and the better you're going to get at it. So an example is in this photo that I have shown, we had a client who was asking us about something like this. Now, I could start trying to measure stuff out, figure out how many balloons, price, costing it all out, but there's so many different size balloons, there's foils, there's a lot going on. And to be honest with you, it was giving me a headache just thinking about it that way. So this is an example where we just threw a number out there, and it's a number. The way that I pick these numbers is a number that is going to make me happy to do the job. So you might have a client actually ask you to build something and you don't really want to do it because it sounds like a big pain. However, if you found a number that would change your mind and your opinion about creating it, then give them that number. And then they're either going to say yes or they're going to say no. And if they say no, you really didn't want to do that anyways. If they say yes, now you have this crazy job where they're willing to pay what some crazy amount of money for it. So I believe we charged them. This job was a few hours away from us, and I want to say we ended up charging like $5,000, and they booked this 3 times from us. So, and it turned out to be pretty easy job. And we made good money on it, but we did not do any market research. We had nothing to compare it to for value-based pricing. It was literally just, let's just throw a number that makes us feel good and then see what they say. So the advantages is you can make a decision very quick. You don't have to wait days to get back to a customer because you're just coming up with it. So you think about it for 2 seconds, figure out what's going to make you smile, and then give them that number. It's very flexible, so it can adapt to different market conditions. Again, there's no rigid pricing model on this one. And then it's very personalized. So most of the time, you're not going to have one customer. When you're using this strategy, you're not going to base this strategy on stuff you already have prices for. So it's a very unique, like this unique item that my customer wants. I'm going to give them a price that's going to fit that specific example, where I might give a different price for a different example or something like that. It is very subjective, and so limitations, it is subjective. What if your customer's like, man, you're crazy, I don't want to pay that price for it? Then guess what? You're going to have to make a decision. You're either going to reduce your price or you're just not going to do it. You're not going to get the job. There is the risk for making mistakes with regards to the fact that maybe there's things you didn't think about. Maybe you could have charged more, or maybe you tried to charge too much and they're not going to go for it. So lastly is you're not going to build a business where every item has this pricing model attached to it because it's not scalable. You're within reason, you're going to have to grow your business using actual numbers and data and stuff like that. So let's take a break. And then when we come back, we're going to start crunching some numbers in the next section.